60,000 years ago, somebody looked at nearly 100 kilometers of open ocean and thought, yeah, we can probably cross that. They had no map, we have no idea what their boats look like, and waiting on the other side was a continent full of giant animals. The surprising part is, they made it. So, how did they pull it off? Back then, the map looked different. Sea levels were lower, and Australia, New Guinea, and Tasmania formed one enormous landmass. We call it Sahul. To the west was another large region called Sunda, covering much of what is now Southeast Asia. Between the two lay Wallacea, a jumble of tropical islands separated by deep water. Even when the seas were lower, those channels remained. There was no land bridge all the way to Sahul. At some point, anyone traveling east had to get on a boat, or a raft, or whatever this is. There were at least two possible ways through this maze. A northern route led through Sulawesi and towards New Guinea. A southern route passed through the smaller islands towards Timor and northwestern Australia. Some models suggest the northern route may have been easier, with more opportunities to keep the next island in sight. On the southern route, the final destination could disappear completely beyond the horizon. We still don't know which route came first. It may not have been only one. We don't know why people kept moving either. Maybe they were looking for food or fresh water. Maybe communities were growing. Maybe one family crossed first, and others followed later. Or perhaps people looked at a distant island and had the same thought we still have today. I wonder what's over there. It probably wasn't one enormous expedition with Australia written on the itinerary. More likely, people moved gradually, along a coast, across a channel, onto another island. Then, sooner or later, someone spotted the next one. Unfortunately, prehistoric boats don't leave much behind. Wood, bamboo, and plant fibers tend to disappear after 60,000 years, so we don't know what these vessels looked like. We only know they worked. Mostly. And carrying one adventurous person is one thing. Carrying children, tools, food, and enough fresh water for several days is something else. If people hope to start a new life, one little raft may not have been enough. They may have traveled in several vessels, or crossed parts of the route again and again. Suddenly, this starts to look less like a lucky fishing trip, and more like organization. There is still another possibility. Maybe nobody planned the very first crossing. Storms, floods, and powerful currents can carry people a long way. One lucky raft reaching an island by accident is possible, but settling a whole continent is a much bigger problem. Enough people have to arrive. They have to survive, raise children, and keep the community going. That probably required more than one successful voyage, so perhaps luck played a part in the first arrival. The people who followed would still need a plan. Some of the island crossings were fairly short, perhaps 20 or 30 kilometers. Still a serious journey on a simple watercraft, but at least you could see where you were going. Pack some food, carry as much water as possible, bring tools, fire-making materials, and everyone who's coming with you. Just not all of your belongings. If they could see the next island, at least they knew which way to go. But currents could push the raft sideways, forcing them to correct course the entire way across. Wallacea has strong currents, winds change with the seasons, and water moves through the narrow channels between islands. Leave at the wrong time, and a short crossing can become much longer than expected. People familiar with the coast would have watched the conditions before setting out. They may have followed the movement of birds, clouds above distant land, the direction of waves, or the position of the sun and stars. We can't know their exact methods, but they didn't need a modern compass to notice that the sea had patterns. Reaching an island didn't automatically mean they had found a good place to stay. Some had plenty of food and fresh water. Others were small, dry, or difficult to live on for long. Then, there was the problem of unfamiliar food. This could be delicious. This might need to be cooked. And this one looks suspiciously confident. They couldn't simply look up which plants were edible. They had to observe, compare them with things they already knew, test cautiously, and remember what happened. Sometimes the result was dinner. Sometimes it was a terrible afternoon, and once in a while. No, probably best to leave that one alone. One lesson learned, many more to go. Island by island, people moved farther east. Then they reached the difficult part. Depending on the route, the final journey to Sahul may have involved close to 100 kilometers of open water. The destination might not have been visible from the shore. They may have climbed to a high point and seen clouds forming over distant land. They may have watched birds traveling out to sea, or perhaps earlier voyages had already given them some idea of what lay ahead. Whatever happened, at some point they launched without a convenient island sitting on the horizon. The first few hours may have felt familiar. The island was still behind them, and they could look back to see where they had come from. Then, the land became a thin line, and then it was gone. At that point, turning around was no easier than continuing. 100 kilometers is a long way on something built without metal tools. The crossing could take several days. During the day, there was heat, glare, and very little shade. At night, it could become surprisingly cold. Fresh water had to be rationed, people had to rest, and somebody still had to keep the vessel heading in roughly the right direction. The animals below probably weren't their biggest concern. Thirst, exhaustion, and a change in the wind were much more dangerous. Even a small injury could become a serious problem when there was nowhere to stop. And then there was seasickness. Spending several days on a moving platform is unpleasant enough when the platform has a cabin, a bed, and a bathroom. Their version probably had none of those things. Personal space was limited. And boredom. Let's not underestimate boredom. How do you pass the time on a long sea journey? They could talk, sing, tell stories, repair tools, and watch the sky. Children still had to be entertained. Someone probably had to settle an argument. Someone else may have spent several hours insisting that a cloud looked like a fish. The journey was dangerous, but much of it may also have involved sitting, waiting, and paddling. Then the signs began to change. More birds, floating leaves, perhaps a particular kind of cloud, and finally, a dark line ahead, land. After days on the water, they had reached Sahul. They wouldn't have called it Australia. They may not even have realized how much land was in front of them, and the coast they saw is gone now. Sea levels later rose and covered much of the old northern shoreline. For them, it was simply the newest island, a very, very large one. There was no time for a grand ceremony. They needed fresh water, somewhere to make camp, and something to eat that wouldn't produce another dancing kangaroo incident. The river mouth looked promising. The river mouth was occupied. 2 eyes above the surface were enough to suggest that drinking somewhere else might be a good idea. So they kept looking. A safe camp needed fresh water nearby, dry ground above the tide, fuel for a fire, and some protection from the weather. It also helped if the ground wasn't covered in enormous, unfamiliar footprints. The first night would have been full of new sounds, different insects, different birds, things moving beyond the firelight, not necessarily dangerous, just new. Sahul came with wildlife, and some of it was much larger than expected. Giant short-faced kangaroos could stand taller than a person. Diprotodon, a distant relative of wombats, grew to roughly the size of a rhinoceros. There were also huge flightless birds and giant reptiles. Exactly which species the first arrivals encountered depended on where they landed and when. We shouldn't imagine every famous Australian giant waiting together on the same beach, but people, and at least some of Sahul's megafauna, did live on the continent at the same time. The first giant animal they saw may not have been dangerous at all. It may simply have stood there, eating, while the newcomers tried to understand exactly what they were looking at. A kangaroo? Sort of. A wombat? Technically closer. A small moving hill. That description also works. The animal had never seen a human. The humans had never seen that animal. Good meeting. Not every introduction would have been that relaxed. Sahul also had large predators, including the marsupial lion and an enormous monitor lizard. The safest encounter with either of them was probably a footprint, a scratch on a tree, or a distant shape moving away. The useful lesson was simple: watch first, approach later, preferably much later. The new arrivals didn't need to defeat these animals. They needed to learn where they lived, when they were active, and how much space to give them. That became the real work after the crossing. Every water source, plant, track, and season had to be understood. Useful discoveries could then be remembered and passed on. Over thousands of years, communities moved into forests, grasslands, mountains, deserts, and coasts. They developed their own languages, traditions, and ways of understanding and caring for the the land. This wasn't one culture spreading unchanged across a continent. It became many communities, adapting to very different places. Their descendants are still here today, among the Aboriginal peoples of Australia and the peoples of New Guinea. And if you enjoyed this trip into the stranger parts of human history, subscribe.